Man, I can't fucking believe this. Another basement, another elevator. How could the same shit happen to the same guy twice?
Ah, Christmas. It's all about the traditions, right? The food, the tree, the gift giving, the getting caught up by mistake in some kind of terrorist plot when all you set out to do was meet your wife. Released just less than 2 years after the first film, Die Hard 2 is a film determined to capture the same magic as its predecessor by largely doing a lot of the same stuff and treading a lot of the same boards to a much lesser effect. That's the film's reputation in a nutshell, at least I believe, but it does have something of a dedicated following all the same. I know it's part of a lot of people's Christmas viewing, much like the first one is, and yeah, I can imagine they make a fun double bill when watched together, largely thanks to them sharing much of the same DNA. Does anyone really like Die Hard 2, or does everyone just really like Die Hard 1 and the sequel retreads so much of the same ground that if you squint at the screen, you could probably convince yourself that you're watching the first one anyway? Good evening, barefoot enthusiasts. Personally speaking, I have now seen Die Hard 2 about 3 or 4 times in my life so far, and there are films that I love and adore that I haven't seen that many times, so I think that must speak to some kind of compelling element that the film has, right? It certainly gets into the action quicker than the first film, providing a good dose of adrenaline up front before it settles into the story, which of course sees the return of Bruce Willis's John McClane, now with the LAPD. The McClanes continue to be the world's unluckiest couple, as something as innocuous as John picking his wife up from the airport is disrupted by a bunch of terrorists, led by a disgraced Colonel William Stewart, played by William Sadler, who takes over the air traffic control system in order to free a drug lord, General Ramon Esperanza, played by Franco Nero. As you'd expect from a Die Hard film, there's a whole load of action, and despite the airport being riddled with security and police, it is largely down to John McClane himself to take down the terrorists and restore the air traffic control before all the circling civilian planes in the air run out of fuel and crash, and as his wife is on one of those planes, meaning that he would spend Christmas a widower. Those are the broad strokes of the plot, and if you're watching this video, you've probably already seen the film. It's one of those films that I feel like everyone has seen. Like I say, I've seen it a fair few times myself, though I must say, on this particular viewing, watching it, particularly after sort of going into the bonus features and what have you, listening to interviews about Die Hard, the first film, and what have you, I was somewhat struck by how much darker, tonally, Die Hard 2 felt against its predecessor. The first film has a lot more humour, personality, and frankly, fun, even campy elements about it. Despite it being quite an intense story about these terrorists and innocent people being killed and so on, the director John McTiernan talked about how humour was still a very important element in such a film. They didn't want the first film to feel downbeat or grim. The mission was always to entertain the audience and not make a serious drama about how awful it would be to actually be a hostage at the mercy of a bunch of terrorists. That's not to say that the second one is suddenly a solemn experience. There is still levity to it, but the overall atmosphere is just not quite as fun and or joyous, I'd say, as it is in Die Hard 1, and I suppose that this is an intentional thing in some respects. The moment that stands out the most, and is somewhat of a spoiler if you haven't seen the film, but it's a moment that I think really relates to the point about tone more starkly than anything else in the film, and it's the sequence involving the British Airlines flight, where an entire plane full of completely innocent civilians crashes and burns, and everyone on board dies. Admittedly, I do find it kind of funny that they decided that it was going to be a plane full of British people to crash and explode in this manner. Like, it's just at a level of, if this were a plane full of Americans, then our American audience might find that a little bit too harrowing. But it's okay, because if it's a plane full of British people, there's a level of disconnect there that means that the audience can still be horrified by the moment, but it won't ruin their fun too much. In the first film, innocent people die, and those moments are impactful, especially in the case of Mr. Takagi, I would say, but it's a different thing when it's a plane full of, like, completely innocent men, women, children. They really make a point of showing you the demographic on this plane, and they really want you to feel it when they are all blown up. Now, you could still have this bit of action, you know, a plane crashes and burns and people die, but have it deliberately be a limited amount of people on board, like a smaller vessel or a non-commercial one, to soften the blow. It kind of makes me think of how, like, in Skyfall, when there's that big tube crash, the filmmakers made it an out-of-service train with only a single driver on board, because if an entire trainload of people were killed in this moment, it would have been a different kind of shock and a mood-altering one. Like I say, here that mood alteration was clearly what they were after. Director Rennie Harlan discusses it in the film's audio commentary.
And I felt, as cruel as it is, I felt that it was important to establish the interior of this plane, show some of the passengers, the lady here, and there was also a little girl whom we established. And while it seems cruel, I felt that for the audience to really relate to all this, it was crucial that they would really feel for these people and feel that they were not just faceless extras, but they were real people like you and I.
And yet, it does shift the mood into a less frivolous place, which I find jars with some of the goofier moments that I do like in isolation, like that very famous shot, possibly the most famous one in the whole film, where John McClane fires towards the camera in an ejector seat. And some of the kills and mayhem are a lot of fun. The icicle in the eye is a kill worthy of a Freddy or a Jason or a Michael Myers. Basically, for the last 45 minutes or so of the film, I am relishing in the bullets and explosions, and I think it finds a fun, violent action movie tone. But this movie is over 2 hours long, and I have to admit, for the majority of that running time, I find the film a bit of a slog. I know that there is technically escalation in the plot. The British Airlines plane crash ups the stakes by several notches, and yet I feel like the film kind of just meanders along in a lot of ways. I guess the curse of getting into the action really quickly by having McClane notice something is going on, getting involved in the action in the baggage facility and so on, I guess that's good for like the first 20 minutes. It hooks you in, but then after that it's like an hour slog until I feel like things kind of kick into a next gear. The decision to set the film at Christmas time again is a curious one to me, but I guess at this point they were probably trying to figure out the rules of like, okay, well, what does constitute a Die Hard film? And apparently being set at Christmas was one of those requirements. Setting it at Christmas, but releasing it in July, of course. Bruce Willis is still an absolute delight to see as John McClane, though I do think that the script makes him a little too snarky for the most part. The character is largely surrounded by arseholes with axes to grind and regulation-obsessed pen pushers, and it stops feeling realistic at a certain point. Like, almost everyone he has to deal with doubts him, wants to betray him, has some unnecessary beef with him, and it's like, okay, I get it, the world is against him, the world is wrong, and if they'd all just shut up and listen to John McClane, the day would be saved much faster. There is this one character who is a strong ally for McClane in the form of Leslie Barnes, played by Art Evans, but that's kinda it. Oh, well, I mean, Reginald VelJohnson's Al Powell also provides some assistance as the script desperately tries to crowbar in as many characters from the first film as possible, even when it doesn't make all that much sense for them to be here, but we'll get to that in more detail in a little bit. We also have a reprieve of McClane's technophobia in a couple of places. I talked about this in my video about the first film. I think that in that film it's an interesting little character quirk, and it's a way of further highlighting how out of his depth this guy is in his wife's workplace, how much of an outsider he is. In Die Hard 2, there's less of a kind of reason for making a point of it, I guess, but I mean, I guess it's just a part of his character, and sure, I mean, I'd probably have trouble working out how to send a fax too. Anyway, bottom line is Bruce Willis adds so much to this film. There's still something quite magical about seeing him in this role, even if the script doesn't necessarily give him quite as much material and nuance to work with as the first, but hey, I can't complain. Bruce Willis in this role is iconic. Yeah, it's a delight to see him here. Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber is an iconic villain, and I don't envy anyone attempting to follow in his footsteps and taking up the role of a lead villain in any of these films from this point on. I mean, never mind the person coming right after, and yeah, Colonel William Stewart is absolutely no Hans Gruber. I don't think the actor is doing anything wrong necessarily, but the character is so serious and stoic, and this probably relates back to what I was saying about the overall tone. Just how, like, Hans Gruber is an absolute blast to watch, whereas Colonel William Stewart is, he's here. The casting of his villainous troupe is distinctive enough, but they're all missing the little quirks and characteristics that brought the rogues of Die Hard to life. Everyone in Die Hard had some little idiosyncrasy, almost subliminal in some ways, like the candy guy, for example, but these little things really added a lot, and it's all just missing from this. I know that I'm trying to have my criticism cake and eating it too. On the one hand, I'm chastising elements that are too similar to the first film, while at the same time wishing that other elements were more like the first film, and yeah, this is the problem that I have with Die Hard 2. Everything about it was already done better by the first film. And just while we're talking about the film's characters, must every supporting player from the first one come back for this? this. The journalist on the plane is probably the most egregious. His presence gives Holly something to do while she's stuck up on the plane, and I'm not against the inclusion of her per se. I mean, it makes sense to give McClane some personal stakes in stopping the villain, and his wife being up on one of the planes is, you know, fair enough. It's just that we spend a lot of time with Holly and this journalist for not all that great a payoff. To be blunt, I think that Holly really gets the short shrift here, and I already know that she doesn't come back as a character in a big way, at least for any of the next few films, and I think that speaks to the fact that the filmmakers just didn't really know what to do with her. And yeah, I can imagine it's difficult to shoehorn her into adventure after adventure, and I'm not surprised that after this one they figured that they'd just not bother for the rest of the series. That being said, I do really like this actress an awful lot, and I liked these two together in the first film. Their chemistry was phenomenal, they felt real, and I'm disappointed that we won't be seeing these two characters together on screen again, knowing that Bonnie Bedelia does not return in any significant capacity in the future. Perhaps my biggest criticism about the film in general is the setting, and that's not a sentence that I often utter, but Nakatomi Plaza is so iconic for a reason. It's one of those movie locations that's just as much of a character as the actual people in the film. Each floor had a distinct personality, so I am well oriented as a viewer as to where I am, where the characters are. It isn't some like dull office block where each floor is the same. Obviously they can't just do the exact same thing again and have John McClane scurrying around the ducts of another office building. And on some level it does make sense to kind of expand the scope of the film out a bit, take it out of just one office block, take it to an entire airport. And in a way you kind of have the best of both worlds, because then you have the stark openness of the runways, but then you also have the option to go into more close-knit quarters in the terminal buildings. However, I really lose any sense of geography about this place, which I found maddening at times. Like, where is that little church in relation to the airport? When they're out on the runway, I can't see the airport anyway, so it looks like John has just trekked for miles to get there. And yeah, I get that it's snowing and visibility is hampered for that reason, but the various places all just felt super disconnected to me, whereas in the first film, everything was kind of seamless and there was a great flow to the whole thing. It also just never really feels like an authentic airport to me, and I know that that's a weird thing to say because they actually shot parts of this at an actual airport. Like, obviously there's some set work at play too, but some of these offices and control rooms and what have you just feel so inauthentic to me, and I don't feel like I'm really there in the location. Now, I know that the Nakatomi Plaza is hardly a realistic representation of, you know, offices that a lot of us work in. It's so grand and impressive, but that works for that film and for the themes it was exploring, with John being out of his depth in this opulent yuppie corporate culture. It's unfair to compare, perhaps. I mean, Nakatomi Plaza is in another lead, but hey, I mean, this is Die Hard 2. It's very difficult to not be thinking about Die Hard 1 when you're watching it, especially when the film is so much of a retread in itself. And ultimately, the fact that this movie is Die Hard 2 is the main thing working against it. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy the film enough, and Renny Harlin is a director I consider a relatively safe pair of hands for these kinds of movies. Like, I have a lot of love for Deep Blue Sea. I think his Nightmare on Elm Street sequel is one of the better ones, and yeah, Die Hard 2 is a fun enough film to watch. Willis is great fun to watch, some of the action and effects are really entertaining, and yet the villains are kind of forgettable. The story resorts to pretty egregious contrivances to bring back characters from the first film, and ultimately I think that the setting is a significant step down and a pretty detrimental one to the rest of the film. It's a fun enough action flick, but lacking some of the classic movie magic spark that the original had, and it's impossible not to compare because the film itself is doing all it can to retread so many of the same steps as its predecessor, but to a much lesser effect. And from what I know and remember of some of the films to come next, I know that they do go in different directions, which I'm all for. As much as I like Bonnie Bedelia, I don't need them to force her into every single story moving forward, and I'm also fine for the settings to open up and for John McClane to become involved in plots in a different way other than just so happening to be in the wrong place at the wrong time on Christmas Eve.
This one's like a regular, normal Christmas. Eggnog, fucking Christmas tree, little turkey. But no, I gotta crawl around this motherfucking tin can.
So yes, keen to move on to the third film in the series, Die Hard with a Vengeance, which is a film I have little to no memory of. But hey, John McTiernan is back as director, so that's something I'm certainly looking forward to. Please do let me know your own thoughts on Die Hard 2 in the comments section below. Am I being a little bit too harsh on it? Please do let me know below. And also below, please do click the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button to stay up to date on future video uploads. There's links to my various socials below as well, so do follow me on those platforms. And with all that being said, and until next time, barefoot enthusiasts, so long for now.